Gig Gab, episode 469 for Monday, February 17th, National Random Acts of Kindness Day, 2025. Greetings, folks, and welcome to Gig Gab, the show by, for, and about working musicians. Our sponsor today, HelloBand.io, where coupon code GigGab20 gets you 20% off. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Back here in Durham, New Hampshire, I'm Dave Hamilton, and today my guest co-host is a musician, a fashion designer, an educator whose career has blended rock and style in ways that few others can claim. Perhaps a career as unique as his name, from working with icons like David Bowie and the Sex Pistols to fronting Slinky Vagabond, which has a new record out that we'll talk about, writing rebel anti-style. He shaped both the sound and the look of music culture. And today we'll dive into that latest album, The Eternal Return, his creative journey, and all kinds of other things. Keanan Duffty, thank you so much for taking your time to join us today.
Dave, thank you. It's a pleasure to be joining you. And what a wonderful high energy intro. Random Acts of Kindness Day should be every day. So
I don't disagree with this. Yeah. But it is today. And it can be every day, even when it's not officially that day. That's right.
For sure. Yeah. Do something nice for someone every day.
Every day. That's I actually
a better place.
Yeah, it does. And selfishly, it feels good. So like there's all the things.
Yeah, it does. It ticks all the boxes.
It ticks all the boxes, indeed. Well, you've certainly ticked all the boxes.
That was quite a segue.
I mean, I have been doing this a little while, so
you're very good.
Yeah, well, let's get to the end of the episode, and you can decide then. Your career has spanned these worlds of music and fashion. I'm curious, which came first for you, or was it sort of always together and the same?
Well, I would say music came first because as a kid I was obsessed with a lot of the sort of bubblegum glam rock. I kind of grew up during the era of the Sweet and Slade and Mark Bolan, Wizard, all of these great bands, and with a lot of really good hit singles. And Bowie too, but I got into Bowie. I understood Bowie a little bit later. I bought some of his, Gene Genie and Rebel and stuff like that. But it took me until probably 1975 to kind of really understand what Bowie was about. And he had a bit more depth than those other bands, even though they're all great. They have amazing songs and I loved them. And I loved a lot of soul music as well at that time. So I got into fashion, if you like, from kind of worshipping these bands and loving the way they looked. And I loved actually their style, and I've always really been into style more so than fashion. I've been fortunate that fashion has given me a career
sure
still do and make a living from. But yeah, music was always the first love.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And I like that you articulated style more than fashion. That's an interesting distinction, and one that I think could be sort of helpful to dive into if we can take a little tangent here. I always say on this show, we've said for 10 years, live music is a visual art.
Yes,
and regardless of whether we as performers put any forethought into it, whatever we happen to be wearing on stage is our costume as far as the audience is concerned. They don't know whether we've thought about this or not. Might be obvious sometimes, but in both directions. But there's the musicians out there who aren't always comfortable drawing attention to themselves and therefore go on stage in, shorts and a t-shirt, and that becomes their costume. Now, people like Jimmy Buffett and Sammy Hagar have really made a living with that costume, like to a huge degree. It's an aspirational thing with them. But for the musicians for whom that is not an intentional choice and it's just a default, this idea of style over fashion, I feel like there's something there. Any advice for someone who's struggling with how they might choose to look on stage?
Yeah, I mean, you referred to people wearing kind of ordinary clothes on stage, and there was a great interview with David Byrne when he was talking about Talking Heads when they were starting, and he said he thought that their image was going to be, they were going to be really ordinary and wear normal clothes. And then they realized that was really difficult because you have to wash normal clothes and iron them. And it takes as much sort of maintenance as it does to have a stage wardrobe. So, you know, to your point, looking normal on stage is as much of a costume as, you know, James Brown going on with his one-piece jumpsuit and his cape, you know. So I think, and James Brown's a great example because he's somebody who he could wear that style, excuse me, he could rock that style, and very few other people could.
Yes.
If somebody else went on stage wearing that, it would almost be like a Halloween costume. Whereas when James Brown went on stage, you believed that that's what he wore all the time. And part of the throwing the cape on the floor was part of the performance, and having his, you know, sort of like sidekick run on, his Batman run on and put the cape back on him and then he'd toss it to the ground again. You know, only a few people could do that. Mick Jagger could do it. You know, a few people in rock. Tina Turner can do it, where she has this fabulous on stage costume that you couldn't probably wear in the street or in real life. And it wasn't anything to do with fashion at the time, but it influenced fashion later. So I just love that, you know, I think a piece of advice for musicians is do what you're comfortable with, do what is an extension of your personality. But make that, you know, keep doing it, keep reinforcing it. Don't chop and change too much. You know, Bowie could change and a few people could change. But even if you think of someone like Prince, who has a very, very clear image that was constructed and was nothing to do with fashion, he was actually very consistent. He had the color purple, he had the insignia, he had, you know, the frills and the kind of, you know, slight flares and the high heels and all the rest of it. But, you know, that became Prince's signature. And that signature can be that kind of look, that kind of extreme stage wear, or it can be something, you know, like Vampire Weekend, who pretty much looked like a bunch of preppy kids, you know. So it could be whatever you make it. You know, Marquis Smith from The Fall, during punk, he would be wearing an Argyle sleeveless sweater. And he looked very normal, almost wearing flares. You know, he looked very normal, but at the time that was extreme because everybody was copying the Sex Pistols and trying to present this nihilistic look, or copying the Ramones and wearing leather jackets and jeans and so on. So oftentimes it's better to go against what's happening in culture, but I think you should always embrace that kind of inner part of yourself that you then want to project. So that's my 2 pence worth.
No, that's great. It's interesting you mentioned Vampire Weekend, because as you were mentioning all the others, I thought in my head, well, there's Vampire Weekend, who's the opposite side of the spectrum. Yeah. But that is an intentional look for them. I am certain of it. Yeah, sure. You know, they clearly have all. There's been a discussion or four about this. But even when you're wearing normal clothes on stage, I feel like there needs to be that, or it's helpful to have the awareness that people are not seeing these up. You're not seeing your stage wear, your costume up close like you are in a mirror. You're seeing it from, you know, 20 feet or 20 yards away, depending on how big the place is. Any advice or thoughts that you have on project, like to use your word, projecting that image of whatever it is you choose? Any tricks to making that work so that it doesn't just look boring from 20 feet away? That's a great observation, actually. I mean, I was very
fortunate to see Public Image in the earliest days. There was a festival in Leeds in Northern England called Futurama, and it was one of the earliest gigs that Public Image did. And it was a festival of like loads of bands, Joy Division, A Certain Ratio, with the early incarnation of Soft Cell and others, and Public Image were the headline act. And they came on at 2 a.m. in the morning, so everybody was like really irritated. And the image at that time, Jarl Wobble used to sit down in what looked like a dentist chair, so he'd play the bass sitting down. And Lydon came on stage, and he was irritated, obviously, and he had his back to the audience for the whole set, which was probably like 6 songs. So, you know, he was sort of intentionally trying to piss people off, and he was very successful.
Sure.
In fact, he's been successful at that his whole career.
I was just going to say, this is kind of on brand. Yeah.
Yeah, it's totally on brand. You know, so I think you kind of have to project whatever it is that you want to project, not necessarily what the audience perceives that they want. Because if John Lydon had gone on stage and done the Johnny Rotten act at that point, you know, it's kind of Richard III hanging off the mic, sort of Iggy Pop style garage band, you know, frontman. I was going to say spitting, but he was always spitting anyway. You know, so if he'd done the Pistols version of Johnny Rotten, it probably would have pleased the audience in a way, but it wouldn't have moved them forward. Yeah. And I think one thing you have to do is to kind of keep move an audience forward the whole time. You know, and there are so many acts that were sort of brilliant at doing that and continue to be brilliant at doing that. And then there are the complete opposites of the Ramones, who were fully formed from the earliest stages and wore the leather jacket, the stripy t-shirt, the ripped jeans, and the Converse shoes, you know, and they were buried in them, you know.
Yes.
So, and that's what people wanted from the Ramones. They wanted that cartoon character always in the same look.
Rosencrantz and Guildenstern on stage, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, and very few people can get away with that because,
you
know, the audience wants to see something, usually wants to see something new every time, even if it's a new iteration of the perception of the artist.
Right.
You know, so it's a delicate balance, I think, for any performer. And you're fortunate if you get to have to walk that tightrope, because it means you've had a tremendous amount of success. So yeah, it's a good one.
I like that, and I think the advice of project what you want to project, I think that's great on many levels. One of which being it allows you to be more comfortable being you. If you're worried about projecting what the audience wants you to project, well, you're losing out of the gate. Yeah. Right. If you're uncomfortable with this anyway, and now you're worried about what you think the audience wants to see you in, I mean, forget about playing your instrument well. You're already in your head. But just choosing to be confident with whatever you've got as your image will sell that image better than hunching over and trying to kind up in a sense. So there's no covering up.
it was interesting because I was really lucky to get to work with several of my kind of idols as I was growing up, and Bowie was one of them. And when everybody always talks about Bowie as being the actor, you know, I mean, whether he was actually in movies or not, he was kind of always had these characters. And I didn't realize, and it didn't really resonate with me until I met him properly the first time. And I sort of run into him backstage at things before, but I actually had a sit down meeting with him for like an hour. And it didn't really register that David Bowie's a character, because when I met with him that first time, he was David Jones. And I realized then, oh my God, you are really good at doing this, because that person that you sort of play in interviews and on stage is David Bowie. It isn't him. It's
interesting.
David Jones was someone else, you know, and he was kind of like the very normal, I think, whatever you consider normal is, but he wasn't as sort of on. And he was very affable and jokey and self-deprecating, but also, you know, made fun of me. And it's a chatty guy, you know. And I realized that Bowie is the rock superstar. So when I've seen him switch that on and become David Bowie from being David Jones in exactly the same, off-duty clothes. Suddenly he becomes Bowie, and it's like, oh my God, So, I mean, that was his greatest role, I think. Which is why he was successful in Man Who Fell to Earth, because he was kind of playing the David Bowie of that era. He was sort of able to sort of transpose that into that movie. But yeah, it's the onstage persona can be a version of yourselves, or it can be the monster that you unleash. If you, it's a bit name dropping, but I was once standing behind Iggy Pop in the supermarket in Soho in New York, because he was buying pasta, and he was just some guy in glasses with his hair tied back. And after he left, I said to the person on the register, "That was Iggy Pop. That was Iggy Pop." And they had no idea who I was talking about. And they said, "Oh no!" They looked at the receipt and they said, "It's his name's Osterberg." And I was like, "Yeah, that's Iggy Pop."
that's how this works.
Yeah, he had his shirt on. He wasn't leaping about and cutting himself up and rolling around in peanut butter. So,
yeah, right. Thank goodness, because that'll get you arrested at the grocery store. It turns out, yeah. I've heard anyway. I'm glad to hear that David Bowie was simply a character that he was able to turn off and on, because we hear stories about some artists who have more trouble than others turning that switch off once it's been turned on. And it's nice to know that he was not, he did not suffer from that. That's great.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and somebody was around for a long time, so he'd kind of been through the mill of, I think, an artist like artists that are famous from being very young, like Michael Jackson, for example, or even, more contemporary artists. I mean, I there's a lot of critique of Selena Gomez at the moment, but I do kind of admire somebody like that who's been a child star and they're still very famous. And they've not actually been in the real world for a long time. They can't go to the supermarket. They can't get on the subway. And they seem to remain fairly grounded, but they can still switch on, the persona when they
persona. Yeah. Fascinating. So you brought up Bowie. So let's tug on this thread a little bit before we move on to other things. How did that come about? I mean, here was Bowie, someone that whose work you admired, and then somehow you're in a room with a meeting with David Jones. What happened in between there? How did that evolve?
Yeah, it's sort of the sort of condensed version of it is I'd contacted his management in the early 2000s because I was interested in getting involved with the merchandising for his tours, and his manager is a gentleman called Bill Zisblatt, who's great. He manages, a lot of mega rock superstars, and a great guy. And, we had a few conversations, and then David had health issues. So the tour that he was on at that time was the reality tour. And that actually ended up being the last time he was going to tour. So the merchandising talk came to nothing. But then a few years later, I struck a deal with my own collection, and it was in Target. So it was in like 700 stores across the United States. So I thought it's worthwhile going back to them at this stage, because that's a deal that would be financially interesting, I think, for David. If I went to him and I was in 100 small stores around the country and around the world, it's probably not that. I don't know. He was strange. He liked doing cool things, and he liked doing things that he could make money from. But, one didn't cancel the other out. So I pitched again to Bill, and Bill said, well, why don't you come up to my office and have a chat with David? And it was kind of strange, but I didn't realize how unusual it was until years later, because David wasn't doing any press. He wasn't doing any live shows. He was kind of off the radar. So that first meeting, I kind of, I had a little bit of bravado about it because I already had this deal. It wasn't like I was using his name to fish for something.
Sure. You were offering this deal to him, not partnering with him on it. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I went up to the office, waited for the sort of customary 20 minutes for the star to arrive. And he came into this huge boardroom with Coco, his sort of, right-hand person.
Yeah.
And he was immediately disarming. He was immediately extremely down to earth and made it seem like it wasn't a weird thing. And I always say this with superstars. Often they're good at doing that. They kind of make it feel not in necessarily, an autograph situation, but if it's a business meeting or something like that, they make it feel normal.
My guess is not his first rodeo at this, and understood that it's far more efficient if he just gets out in front of it instead of having to get weird for a little bit. Yeah.
And I've had the same situation, sitting in Gwen Stefani's kitchen, picking fabrics for her collection. And, she just made it feel like it was completely normal. Do you want a cup of tea? And it's
Which it is.
Except it's just another human being, but that human being's a mega superstar. So
exactly.
So with David, we kind of had a chat. He said to me, have you already talked to Target about this? And I said, no. So he kind of realized then that I wasn't fishing, that it was actually there was a trust factor. And he gave me his blessing. And he said, okay, go and pitch it to them, see what they say. He wasn't automatically expecting that this would happen. Again,
you've already got the deal, and they probably know his stage name, so
know who he is.
Yeah, they might.
And he was very. I grew up in a town in the north of England called Doncaster, which is it was a coal mining town. The coal mining's all gone now. But David's dad was from there. So he has an affinity with that part of the world. Hull, which is the next town along, is where most of the spiders were from. So he kind of likes Yorkshire people. We have a sort of certain personality of being blunt, straightforward, down to earth, honest, all of that. And so there was a trust factor. And so, he kind of gave me his blessing, and off I went to Minneapolis to pitch it to Target. And then we worked together for about 9 months. We had, a number of sort of design review meetings. He didn't design anything. He wanted me to design it and then kind of run everything by him to get his okay.
Sure.
And he was great. I mean, at one point he said to me, "Oh, you should make your name bigger on the label," because it was Bowie by Keanan Duffty, and I said, "Well, they're buying it for you, obviously, they're buying it for Bowie," and he said, "Well, always make your name as big as you can," which was kind of very generous,
Huh. But also perhaps some great life advice, like.
It's funny because Martha Stewart said the same thing to me. And kind of your understanding that you're the brand, and sort of project that and do it with confidence. Don't be shy about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's that balance of having humility and self-awareness and all of those things, but also, hey, look, I'm running a business here. Like, the name should be big. Yeah, it's interesting.
I mean, it's interesting because Daft Punk and DJ Marshmello sort of did the opposite, where you don't know who they are and they wear those helmets, or Kiss started out like that as well. Nobody knew what Kiss really looked like except for their next door neighbors and the guy in the dry cleaners. But
sure, yeah, the Residents,
the Residents, another great example. They're kind of the originals actually of the sort of before Daft Punk and others.
Yeah.
They were kind of one of the originals of doing that. Cool.
All right, look, we all know the golden rule, right? Always be performing. But if your fans can't find you after the gig, are you really performing at all? Enter our sponsor, HelloBand's Quick Start Package. This is the easiest way to connect with fans instantly. No carrier pigeons required. For just $57, you get 6 months of HelloBand, 200 QR-powered table cards, and 10 posters. That means at your gigs, your fans can scan, buy your merch, join your mailing list, or follow your next show with zero effort. Think of it as a digital roadie who never forgets your set list. And the best part, no tech skills required. Even your drummer could set it up. Wait a minute. What am I saying? Anyway, head to helloband.io/quickstart and use code GIGGAB20 for an additional 20% off. I know. Don't just play gigs, own them with HelloBand. I've used this in my band with Monkey Fist. And it's fantastic being able to interface with the crowd in real time without them having to get up out of their seats. People are so much more likely to do all of these things, follow you on your socials, come up and request a song when they don't have to come up to request a song. And then what do they do after the request? They tip because you make it easy right there for them after they scan that QR code. That's all they need to go. So again, HelloBand.io/quickstart. Use code GigGab20 for 20% off. And our thanks to HelloBand for doing what they do and for sponsoring this episode. All right, so all of these things that we've been talking about, Keanan, are referenced in a lot of these lessons are there in your new book, Rebel, Rebel, Anti-Style. And I probably should have said that before we got into all those stories, but we just got into the stories, which is probably better. And I wanted to make sure people knew about your book because it's a fun read, an interesting read. And then I want to talk about your new record too. But one more thing, kind of on this rebel anti-style vibe. How do you see the relationship between style and music evolving today, like with the digital age? And any advice specific to projecting your image when you're not on stage?
That is a great question. A lot of younger bands and younger artists are much more savvy today about connecting with fans constantly and having a dialogue with fans. And I think that's really beneficial to building that audience and maintaining that sort of, the cult audience. It's something that it sort of back in the day when I was starting out, especially in the 80s, I had my first record out, and the only connection with fans was through the music press. And right. So you kind of had to get, reviews in the UK. There was the New Musical Express, Melody Maker, Record Mirror, and Sounds. They had huge circulation. They were selling like 18 million weekly newspapers. So if you think the UK was at that time was only 50 million people, so it was kind of over a third.
That's huge.
It's kind of huge. But it was difficult to get into those papers. However, when I started out, I was in a punk band, and then that evolved into this kind of electronic music project that was basically, we were described as sounding like a cross between the band Bauhaus and a broken vacuum cleaner. We were, which is
a unique description.
It's a great quote, and I love that quote. But we did our first gig in a church basement in my hometown Doncaster, supporting a local band who had a big following. They were a full band. It was like 8 people, backing singers, saxophone player, the whole thing. And they kind of just brought us on board as a kind of a last minute support. There was just 2 of us, me standing there with a guitar and a synthesizer, and my buddy with a drum machine and a bass and some slides in the background, slideshow. That was it.
Huh?
It was,
yeah, but you had the visual element from gig number 1.
Yeah, we had the visuals, and I was like 16. It was 1980, so yeah, I was 16. And that first gig, we got a review in Sounds. I mean, it was amazing because there was a local journalist who wrote regularly for Sounds, and he happened to come to review the main band. They'd invited him. He didn't review them. He reviewed us. So they never asked us to support them again.
That's the end of that. That's right. Yeah.
But I thought, it's this easy? Because, we kind of were intentionally migraine inducing in our sort of, I wouldn't say it was music. It was like sound collage. We weren't trying to be commercial at that time. We were trying to really full on assault on the audience.
Sure.
So, I don't think, a lot of bands don't necessarily at that era didn't necessarily have the same fortune, that it sort of demystified everything a little bit. And it made me think, okay, you just got to have a go and try, because the world is out there and you can reach them. So, I think, today social media allows for that reach, but also there's a lot of noise. It's difficult, to kind of reach a broad audience.
Yeah, there's no reporter deciding which band to promote on social media. Everyone is right there. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's you're competing with every big artist in the world and every small artist and everything in between. So building that relationship is and always will be the core, the sort of most important tenet of being an artist of any kind, being a creative artist.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lot of the people that I really admire, ultimately they were sort of cult artists. There are very few people that transcend in the way that, say, the Beatles did or Michael Jackson did. Bowie was essentially a cult artist, and he kind of went mainstream in the 80s, but then he almost lost his cult following, and he managed to claw that back in the 90s. And, never sold the records that he sold with Let's Dance. But I don't think that really mattered to him. I think he was sort of more the cool factor actually mattered to him quite a lot.
Yeah.
This
is interesting. No, the idea that most bands are cult artists, you're correct. I mean, and it's worth shining a light on that statement there. Trying to be something to everyone or even something to most is impossible. Almost impossible, right? I mean, the Beatles, certainly there are people who don't like the Beatles, but they're hard to find, and that's okay. But most bands can't have that kind of appeal, and you almost don't want to. The burden of managing that kind of appeal, it crushed them, right? Yep. I mean, like, there's a reason the Beatles only lasted, less than 10 years. And it's that they became something to everyone. And that's what do you do with that? It's easier when you have a cult following. Now, a cult following of a minimum size so that you can support a career and all those things. That's the sweet spot, right? Where you can get away with your thing while still having enough people there to pay to buy tickets, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's that's part of the kind of talent show culture that takes away that cult aspect, because a lot of those people that they have some commercial success and they come out of that show, whether it's X Factor or what is it? American Idol here. Pop Idol in the UK. And there are a myriad of other ones. So, but they don't necessarily have a chance to kind of build that cult audience. They're immediately thrown into the piranha tank of the mainstream, and they either get eaten alive, which is usually what happens.
Yes.
And there's no support system from a cult audience, from the people that were into them before they hit the mainstream. And that's why most of them then go away. And it's true in the fashion world as well. There was a sort of big fashion reality show that did the same thing. Essentially, it made people household names, but they appeared not to have paid their dues. Many of them have, and they know how to make garments and sew and design and all the rest of it. But they hadn't had a chance to build that core base audience who are fanatical and remain fanatical. Yeah,
right. Yeah, that there is a benefit to that. I mean, it's a sweet spot for sure. Yeah. Having a cult audience of 2 can be amazing. It is interesting. With social media, if you put a post out there and it gets 15 likes, that's often considered failure, right? But it's not. If you go and speak at a conference for an audience of, what's that going to be? Maybe 100 people, 150 people, and 15 of them come up at the end and say, "Hey, I liked what you did." That's huge success, and we just don't see it that way. It's a weird world that we live in.
It is, yeah. I mean, I think you're speaking about the conference thing. Rebel is actually a book I had out previously. I currently have a book called The Fashion Entrepreneur. It's how to build a fashion business. You can actually apply the principles of it to any creative enterprise. But I was just in Mexico, in Guadalajara, speaking at a fashion trade show.
Sure.
And we had probably 200 people in the audience, and sort of sold a lot of books there. But basically I'm telling them go to Amazon to buy it, and they were signing up right there and then. And then before that, I was in London at my old school, which is a fashion school called Central St. Martin's. And again, 200 people. We sold books on site there. And it's amazing how many people actually message me through social media after these events and follow up and say, I bought your book. Now I've read your book. I love it. Can you give me some advice? Can you tell me more? Where can I find your music? I know you make music as well. Where can I find your clothes? Da, da, da. So again, that's that sort of building that cult audience. And it's by getting out in front of people and doing it, and whether it's playing live, which, I do as well. I was just doing a gig a couple of weeks ago in New York, just connecting with an audience, and they kind of dig in and find more. And it's the principle of every creative artist. It's actually doing it, and you build one by one. You build.
Yes. Yeah, one by one. Yeah, that's fascinating. This book to me is even more interesting than Rebel. Well, I mean, and perhaps even more relevant to the audience, because the full title, folks, is The Fashion Entrepreneur: A Definitive Guide to Building Your Brand, and it just came out in September. So there's already a link to that now in the show notes for everybody to find at giggabpodcast.com, and you can go get that. This is going to be the next book I read. So this looks, well, I mean, it's the thing we're all doing all the time, and all the advice that we can get. Yeah. And you're right. Building that audience one person at a time, it works.
Yeah. I think
it works.
One of the number one things that I learned really early on, before I even had a career, before I even, kind of went into learning at a higher education level myself, is networking, collaborating. They're the two important factors. So I've done this my whole career, working with other people. In this Slinky Vagabond music project that I've been working on for the last 6-7 years, I work with my co-songwriter, producer, guitar player, Fabio Fabri. We have a great collaboration. And then beyond that, we collaborate with other artists.
Sure.
And then the book that you just mentioned, I have collaborators, some very famous ones like Tommy Hilfiger, but also people from the marketing industry, the branding industry, and then, contributors from Vogue, a very famous British designer, Jenny Packham, who dresses the Kate Middleton. I forget what her title is now, but she's like Williams, whatever she is, the Princess of Wales, I think she is now. So having those collaborations is really important, because from number one, from a cynical aspect, they're bold-faced names that people know, so they're more likely to engage in your projects. If they may not know you, but they may know some of the names that are associated with it. And I only ever collaborate with people that I kind of either know well or I know through the industry. It's not, cold calling people.
Sure.
And in the case of music, that could be, a producer that you work with, or somebody that you collaborate with. If you make electronic dance music, with somebody that makes great beats, or it could be a DJ that has some prominence that you kind of collaborate with, that then plays your music. So I think the collaboration and the networking go hand in hand. It's not who you know, it's who you get to know. But you need to get to know people, not in a cynical way, but people that you can do something for them, and they can probably do something for you. So there's a sort of symbiotic relationship.
I always think of that. I call that in my head the law of reciprocity, right? Do something for someone else first. Always. It's way easier to do something for someone else than to ask them to do something for you. It
is. And going back to what you said at the beginning of the show, a kind act, for someone else is very important, and do it without expectations of anything.
Yes.
In return.
Oh yeah.
So if you're a creative artist and somebody asks you for a favor or to collaborate with them, jump in and do it. If it's something that you think you can contribute to well,
yes.
do it, and then wherever that goes is wherever it goes, but then that might come back to you, and usually it does.
It usually does. It might not be a one-to-one thing, but it will all work out in the end. Just keep, like you said, the random acts of kindness, the law of reciprocity, whatever we want to call it. Give first. Yes, for
Absolutely.
sure. Yeah. That's great. All right. So you mentioned your band, Slinky Vagabond. You've got this new record, The Eternal Return, out. I've spent some time listening to. I love it. This is, in today's terms, I would call it like harmony-laden avant-garde power pop. But it might be art rock if we rewind a few decades. So it's whatever you want to call it. I like it. It's great. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the Slinky Vagabond's a project that I started in the 90s, actually.
Okay.
And then it kind of morphed into this super group of sorts. In 2007, I started working with Earl Slick, who played with Bowie, who's guitar player with Bowie from the mid 70s. And then we put a band together with Clem Burke on drums and Glenn Matlock from the Sex Pistols on bass. We supported the New York Dolls. We did a whole bunch of shows at New York Fashion Week and so on and so forth. Some fundraiser stuff too. And it was great. And then the Pistols were reforming at that period for a sort of, I think it was the 30th anniversary of Nevermind the Bollocks. So they did a short tour, and Blondie started touring again in earnest, So the thing sort of drifted apart, and we're all still very friendly, and we see each other quite regularly. But that iteration drifted apart. And then I was working in Italy at a fashion school. I was kind of visiting and teaching there. Yeah. And in 2017, they invited me to do this big guest lecture with a big audience. And so I asked them, can I bring a mate of mine, to sort of speak with me? And I wanted to speak about working at retail, which is what I did when I was in college. And what my friend did was, when he was at the same college before me, he was working in a retail store as well, but he's Glenn Matlock from the Sex Pistols, and he was working in Malcolm McLaren and Vivian Westwood's shop. So it was kind of it
sounds like you might have undersold this a little bit at first.
I mean, well, I did, because I thought that students, it might be, a kind of interesting shock to them when they realized they were going to hear from a Sex Pistol, So we did that. And in the audience was this guy, Fabio Fabri, who wasn't a student, but he was kind of connected with the school. He was teaching a class in branding at the school. And he came up to us afterwards. And I know he was sort of wanting to talk to Glenn and blah, blah, blah. Glenn's a superstar. But we got into a conversation, and he said to me, look, I've got a studio. Do you want to come and listen to some tracks, play some music, and, while you're here? And I said, yeah, sure. Absolutely. So I did. And Glenn left. He went off with his girlfriend to go and visit Rome and do a bit of, sightseeing in Italy. But I went to Fabio's studio, and we kind of hit it off, and we just became friendly. And so I would go back to Italy, sort of every few weeks. And whilst I was there, I would go and do something in his studio. And he had a lot of material that he'd written. I had a lot of demos and material and lyrics that I had. So we just kind of threw everything together. And we made the first record that we made from it was called King Boy Vandals, which is actually an anagram of Slinky Vagabond. And that came.
That's awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
It was fun.
That's
good. And it's funny because like that kind of chopping it up and throwing it back together is kind of what the record is. We kind of had all of this mishmash of ideas, and it does sound like that. And we got a bunch of collaborators too. We got Midjure, Dave Formula from Magazine, Richard Fortis, who played in Guns N' Roses for a long, long time. These are all people that I kind of either knew well, or in Dave Formula from Magazine's case, he was managed by a high school friend of mine. So kind of connected us together. And they all played on the record. And the idea was to just bring a bit of flavor of what they do to this record, which is, as you said, kind of melodic power pop, art rock, whatever. and it works. But I think the new album, The Eternal Return, works much better because this is more cohesive, and we've had now Fabio and I, after 6 years, know each other very well.
Yeah, it sounded. I kept. I was listening. My first listen was at my desk. You had sent it to me ahead of time, and so I started listening, and then I'd have to take a phone call or something. Okay, I pause, and every time I dropped back in, it felt like I was continuing a thing. It feels like a cohesive album.
Yes,
but with variations as one would expect. Like
it seems thematic. I mean, it's not like a concept record or anything, but a few people have said to me, "Oh, is it like kind of a narrative?" It isn't, but I think lyrically there are patterns in the lyrics.
It flows, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, there's a co-write of one track with Earl Slick, and there's a co-write with Glenn Matlock that actually were older songs, and they probably stand out as being a little bit different from everything else. But even so, they kind of blend too, because Fabio's playing guitar and everything, so it kind of gives it that sort of even keel. But we're very proud of it. We love it, and we're very happy that it's getting a good response.
Yeah,
and it's out on vinyl, red vinyl.
Nice.
And and CD and
red vinyl is the best vinyl, I think. I don't know. We did our Bitter Pill record last year. We released on red vinyl, so we feel pretty good about that. Yeah.
Well, I think so. There's a couple of things. So in color values, red and black are very similar. If you think about when you're in a dark room, you have a red light because it's essentially the same light quality as black. So you can actually see what you're doing if you're processing film, or printing pictures. With dyes, black dye is very heavy and red dye is very heavy. So I would think chemically black vinyl and red vinyl are quite similar. So, their quality of reproduction of sound, supposedly you don't lose anything when it's red vinyl.
That's what we're told. Yeah.
That's what we're told. I mean,
that's what we're told.
We were told by the pressing plant in Germany, "Oh, it's fine. It's going to be exactly the same as," but it's sort of historically, Glenn was in a band after the Pistols, his first band with Midge Ure. Midge was the singer and guitar player, and it was called Rich Kids. And their first single was a red vinyl single called Rich Kids in a red, just like no words, nothing, red sleeve. And I always love that. And so this was kind of a nod to the Rich Kids, is to do the kind of red vinyl thing. It's for me personally. I mean, no one else probably knows or cares, but that's kind of what I love about it. And and then we got to work with our really good friend Kevin Grady, who did the design for the whole package. And he's an amazing designer, but he also has an electronic music act called Black Plastic too. We've worked with him before, so it was great to work with him on the packaging and design. So it's very cohesive, I think.
Yeah, very cool. I have a random question for you. I usually ask this of musicians who spend a lot of time touring because of their music.
Yeah.
You spend a lot of time sort of traveling the world because of music and your fashion business and all of those things. And so I always ask for travel tips, but the one that I really like to ask is there anything that you do to make the road feel more like home? Anything you bring with you to a hotel room to make it feel less like the sterile hotel room that it's going to be that you need to stay in for the next 4 days or whatever that is?
That's a great question. And what I usually do is I always have fairly elaborate clothes with me.
Okay.
I usually drape those all over the room that I'm in, because first of all, it's probably like a bit of a AD thing that I kind of like to be able to see everything that I'm working with. So my desktop on my computer is littered with folders. I have piles of things from the house, that I in that pile, but my wife will say, move that, it's a mess. But I do that in hotel rooms too. I hang, I wear a lot of, I'm amazingly not wearing a scarf today, but my friends make fun of me because I'm always wearing scarves. So I drape those, and I drape the clothes I take with me. Usually I did a show in Liverpool last year as a big Bowie convention. It's called the David Bowie World Fan Convention. And we did a show, Carlos Alomar, and various other, Kevin Armstrong, other Bowie Band alumni were part of that. And we did a live performance too. So I'm always taking stage clothes with me.
Sure.
I always have kind of an element of stage clothes. And I pack very carefully so that everything can kind of intermingle with everything else. So I can make, a carry-on bag look like it's a full wardrobe. But yeah, I hang everything
Smart.
all over the room. So I can see it, and I also feel like I'm in my world.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's similar to what Brian Ray, who is the guitar player and bass player with Paul McCartney, when he tours, he told me he brings scarves with him to drape over the lights in the hotel room. With all fluorescent bulbs, he doesn't worry about them burning up anymore. But he says they pack down to nothing, so it's not like they take up a ton of space. And he just throws them over the lamps in the room, and it kind of makes it feel like his. So it totally makes sense. Yeah, hanging your clothes out instead of in the closet. Why not? I love that. Yeah. Why not? Yeah.
I mean, they're decorative objects, and there's always a place. There were like ugly pictures in a hotel room, or pictures.
Yeah, you just hang it over that.
Really care about. You drape it over that. I've got this really great, very old silk British flag that I wear as a scarf, and it's literally decaying. So I usually take that with me and kind of drape it over a picture, and that kind of sets the scene for everything else. And then I'll hang my boots up, and I'll hang a frock coat over here, and a frilly shirt over there, and what have you. And it makes me feel like I'm kind of at home.
I like it. I think that's great. That's awesome. I'm trying to think if there's anything that we haven't talked about here. We've gone kind of all over the place. Do you have any live shows with Slinky Vagabond or anything else coming up where people might wind up being able to see you?
We're trying to plan something for later in the year. My kind of dance card is sort of full until the end of July. Unfortunately, I have a lot of stuff going on till the end of July, but I was talking to a promoter that I work with on the Bowie convention in Liverpool. He does a lot of live production in the UK. It's an organization called Sound City, and I was talking to him about the practicality of putting together something. The difficult thing with us is I live in New York, Fabio lives in Florence, Italy. And so logistically, we're quite far apart. And the two of us are the core. And then everyone else, the bass player, a drummer, a keyboard player, we have to bring them in. So we have to rehearse them. And, it's like a sort of probably a 4 or 5 day prep. So we have to do several shows. We can't just do one-off. I mean, we could do
you can't do a one-off somewhere in Manhattan. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, we could do a one-off in Manhattan, actually, because the drummer on our new record he's the leader of a band called The Ritualists, and he would loan us his bass player. Well, he is his bass player. He would play bass for us. His drummer would drum for us, and the keyboard player would play keys. We would support them, and then they could, help us with, be the sort of, backline band.
The backing band, if you will. Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's New York is possible, but doing stuff I'd love to do something in London. Italy's really hard. It's the live music scene in Italy. They only really want big artists. It's very difficult. There are a couple of festivals. There's a blues festival in a town called Lucca, which is an amazing blues festival, but we don't play blues. So
sure, yeah, it's not relevant. Yeah,
we might be getting up with our kind of fragmented art rock, and they'll be like, wait a minute, where's the 12 bar?
Yeah, that's right. These are only 8 bar phrases. What happened? That's right. Yeah. Well, thank you for taking your time and sharing all of this with us. This has been utterly wonderful. Yeah. So much fun. There are 3 words that we like to say to our audience every week, and if you would like, I would love to have you be the one to share this with people as we leave. But first, where can people find you?
So our band website is slinkyvagabond.net, and you can actually buy, if you're in Europe, you can buy the album on vinyl, CD from the site, and there's bundles and there's all sorts of other stuff. And then my own website, KeananDuffty.com, we're just building a store, or we're updating the store in that, so you could buy the current record, the previous record, the books, and all that kind of stuff. But you can find the books on Amazon.
Sure.
You can probably find, I don't know if you can, I think you can find the record on Amazon, and you can find it on all streaming services and download and stuff. It's on YouTube, it's on Spotify, it's on everything else. Both this one and King Boy Vandals. And then there's other stuff, my solo stuff from the 80s and all that. It's kicking around somewhere.
Cool.
Yeah, we're actually just working on, it's a 40th anniversary of a record I did in 1985. Obviously, that's the 40th anniversary in September. So
we don't like to do that kind of math, we don't. It's not so good.
I never even remember which year I'm in. It's kind of terrible, but
that's maybe not so terrible.
I'm getting a few people to do remixes of that record. Friends of ours, Cult with No Name, that are an electronic duo in London. They actually did a remix for us for this new record, for the song Icarus Falls. And so they're doing a remix for my 80s 40th anniversary thing. And there's a BBC session on that as well. And so we're doing that as a vinyl, a CD, and a downloadable as well. So that will be
cool.
fun.
All right.
Yeah. So all everywhere, basically, you find me anywhere. I'm the only person in the world with this weird name as well, so it's pretty easy to find me on.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, not the worst thing. So yeah, that's great. Keanan, thank you again. And now, if you would, those 3 magic words for our audience, we love it when everybody can share those.
Always be performing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, folks. Of course, KeananDuffty.com and SlinkyVagabond.net are linked in the show notes at GetGabPodcast.com. Send us anything, feedback at GetGabPodcast.com, and always be performing. We'll see you next week. And it's that easy.